Yo, what is up everybody, Jay the Game. Welcome back to another Naruto reaction video here today. And today we got a very interesting video by the great Swagkage. As you can tell by the title, this is explaining Naruto's first great ninja war. So folks, I think it's interesting to take a dive and explore the illustrious history of the Naruto verse. It really speaks testaments to the kind of prolific author Kishimoto really is and was, right? The history of Naruto is the exact reason why the Naruto fandom is booming in popularity. It is the sole reason why Naruto is so loved and admired by most likely tens of millions of individuals around the globe, right? Because Kishimoto wrote an amazing history known as Naruto. So the Great Ninja Wars are essential in explaining that illustrious history. And today Swag's going to be talking about the very first Great Ninja War. And I'm very intrigued to see what he has to say about that one. But before we begin, any really appreciate it, hit that like button, turn on notifications, stay there with yours truly. And if you're new and you enjoy, man, and you mess with the kid, make sure to hit that sub button, because once you do, become part of the family forever. Let's not waste any more time, screen. Let's see what Swag says about this.
Hey everybody, how's it going? Swagkage here, and today I wanted to talk about something that I feel is pretty underexplored. Naruto is a series with a lot of lore, and some of the cornerstones of that lore are the Great Ninja Wars, which get brought up all the time. But the thing is, they're only ever either mentioned in passing or shown during brief flashbacks. Since the information is so scattered, I figured it was worth making a video to make everything a lot more digestible, and also because I believe that we can piece everything together in a way that leaves us with more information than we started out with. Now, all that said, I think that each of the wars warrants having its own video, so today I'm only going to be talking about the first. If people like this video enough, then I'll be sure to make a follow-up about the second and eventually the third. But for now, at least, we've already got plenty to discuss with just the first war. This is the conflict that we're told the least about directly, but I think we know more about the time period that this war took place in than we do about either the second or the third. All we know for sure is that in the middle of the war, Hashirama called for the first ever 5-Kage summit, and that sometime toward the end of the war, Tobirama was killed by the Kinkaku force. These things are clearly said to have happened during the first Great Ninja War, and though it may not seem like it initially, there's actually a lot that we can infer from these two pieces of information. Since the summit took place in the middle of the first war, it's important to note that the first Kage of each of the 5 great nations was present there. This of course means that they were all alive and in good health when the first war began. This is pretty interesting because it's very likely that none of them lived to see the end of the war. During the 4th Great Ninja War, shortly after he's summoned and woken up by Kabuto, Mu makes it very clear that he suspects Tobirama is the person who revived him and the other 3 Kage with the reanimation jutsu. Now obviously this is only something he'd say if Tobirama was still alive at the time of his death, and as we've already established, Tobirama was killed at some point during the first Great Ninja War by the Kinkaku force. Since Mu must have died at some point before Tobirama did, this means that he must have been killed during the first war, and it also means that the first Tsuchikage should have been killed as well. The same should also be true of the first and second Mizukage, since we know that Mu and Gengetsu killed each other at the end of a lengthy death match. Something else we also know is that during his time as Hokage, Tobirama met with the second Raikage to discuss forming an alliance between the Leaf and the Cloud. Now since the second Raikage was in power at this point, we can assume that the first Raikage had already been killed. So based on what we know, the only one of the original 5 Kage who could have possibly survived the first war was the first Kazekage. While it's totally within the realm of possibility that he survived, I think it's equally likely that he was killed at some point during this war as well. It's well known throughout the Sand Village that the Kazekage have a history of being assassinated. We also know, based on the fact that Kakazu was sent by the Waterfall Village to assassinate Hashirama at some point, that using assassins to wipe out village leaders wasn't completely off the table. And the first Kazekage in particular seems like he would have had a target on his back, since during the first 5-Kage summit, he was, of all 5 Kage, the least cooperative by far. He asked for a lot more than any of the other villages did, and made it pretty clear that he wouldn't be taking part in Hashirama's proposed alliance unless he got what he wanted. Now this goes beyond the other villages simply not liking the first Kazekage because of this. He may have been one of the only reasons the war went on for as long as it did. If he refused to agree to any peace offerings unless his initial terms were met, then it makes a ton of sense that somebody from one of the other villages, or even somebody from the Hidden Sand village, would have sent somebody to assassinate him just so that the war could be brought to an end. Now again, this may not be what happened at all. I might be way off the mark, but I think think it makes a lot of sense, and of all the possibilities I was able to come up with, this is the one that seemed the most reasonable to me. Now, while all this does give us an idea of how bloody and costly the war may have been, it doesn't tell us anything about what caused it. Even considering everything we do know, this is still pretty vague. We are shown a glimpse of pre-war tension through a flashback that happens just before Madara's fight against the five Kage. Madara tells Mu and Inoki that the Stone Village would be wise to bow to the might of Konoha, and it's heavily implied that
would definitely create some tension,
before or
for sure.
after this, he fought both of them in an effort to show them what would happen if they refused. It's also pretty clearly implied that Hashirama had attempted to establish a friendly relationship with the stone at this point, and I'm not sure if Madara went to any other villages and did something like this, or what the Leaf's relationship with those villages would have been at this point, but this should have been more than enough to at least plant the seeds of discourse between the Leaf and the stone. Something we can infer from this is that the conflict may have been rooted in fear. Without even having fought against Konoha, I can imagine that just hearing about Madara and Hashirama's fight, a fight so explosive that it created the entire final valley, would have been more than enough to spook a handful of foreign village leaders. This is implied to be at least part of the reason at the first 5 Kage summit anyway, since after all, every village except the Sand is asking for one or more Biju in exchange for agreeing to peace. Of course, it's also very likely that a major reason this war took place is because of every village's desire for land and resources. Now, at least based on Hashirama's behavior, it doesn't seem like the Leaf had any intention of expanding or conquering its enemies. That said, I don't think the village really had a choice and ended up being forced to participate out of necessity. This may sound a bit odd at first, since if, as I just said, the other villages all had plenty of reason to be afraid of Konoha, it wouldn't make much sense for them to attack it. But the thing is, the Land of Fire is surrounded by the other 4 great nations. It's pretty much in the center of all of them. As we can see, while it is still hypothetically possible for ninja from one village to travel to any of the others without necessarily having to pass through the Land of Fire, doing so is far from ideal. There are 3 different ways that this could have led to the Leaf getting pulled into the war. The first is that one or more of the other villages truly did try to conquer it because of how much military value its location had. Control of the Land of Fire, especially in addition to any one of the 4 nations surrounding it, would have made conquering the remaining 3 nations significantly easier. The Leaf being surrounded by enemies may have made the other villages a bit less apprehensive about attacking it, since they may have felt that the constant pressure from all sides would be enough to offset the massive power difference between the Leaf village's military and the military of all of its opponents. Something that's equally possible is that none of the other villages declared war on Konoha, but instead had a habit of passing through the Land of Fire and fighting with other villages while they were there. This, of course, would have posed a massive risk to the non-ninja population of the Land of Fire, and probably would have forced the Leaf village to step in to save them. The last, and at least in my opinion most interesting possibility, is that the Leaf didn't initially participate in the first war at all. We know that Hashirama really wanted to establish a friendly relationship between the Leaf and all of the other
more so than anybody else, I'd argue.
It's possible that he may have actually temporarily succeeded. Before the first war began, one or more of the other major villages may have seen Konoha as an ally. As a matter of fact, this is even implied in the flashback I mentioned earlier, when Inoki hints at the possibility that Hashirama has already said that the Leaf and the Stone are on good terms. If this was the case, and the Leaf wasn't initially involved in the war at all, its position would have made it really tempting for the other villages to ask for its help, especially if all of those other villages were under the impression that the Leaf village was an ally of theirs. Now, obviously, Hashirama wouldn't be able to agree to help all of the villages that were involved if they were all fighting each other,
right.
And this may have been what led to the first 5 Kage summit being called in the first place. If the Leaf didn't actually have to fight in the first war, but felt pressured to do something about it in order to maintain a healthy relationship with all of its neighbors, then calling a peace summit like this makes total sense. Now, any of these 3 things could have been the catalyst for Hashirama's decision to meet with the other Kage, but in any case, as we know, the summit wasn't very effective. As I mentioned earlier, the first Kazekage was without a doubt partially responsible for this, since he brought some pretty ludicrous terms to the table in an environment when tensions were already really high. Something else that also probably kept things rocky was the matter of the Biju. Having one or more of these things at their disposal may have made the other Kage a bit more reckless than they would have been without them, even if they had entered the summit fully intent on agreeing to peace. This could have not only potentially done a lot to make the other villages less afraid of Konoha by making them feel like the playing field had been evened a little, but also done just as much to make them even more afraid of all of the other non-Konoha villages now that everyone had a tailed beast or 2 under their control. Feelings like this, especially if they're widespread, are obviously not good for ongoing peace negotiations. And I mean, the peace negotiations already weren't going super well to begin with, so this was one big recipe for disaster. Something else that also likely played a large part in the war is the existence of village infighting and rogue factions. When Tobirama tried to follow up on Hashirama's attempts at peace by forming an alliance with the Cloud Village, we know of course that he and the second Raikage were assaulted by the Gold and Silver brothers. All the sources we have describe this incident as a coup, which means whether Kinkaku and Ginkaku acted alone, or sure they were acting on behalf of a larger group of people, their actions were probably politically motivated. Now, I doubt events of this magnitude, people attacking village leaders and nearly killing them in broad daylight, were all that common, but the outcome of this war was obviously very important to a lot of people. So it makes sense that if enough people disagreed strongly enough with the decisions made by those in charge of them, that they, along with other members of their village, may go rogue and fight on behalf of what they think is best. Now, it's one thing to claim that infighting like this existed, but an entirely different thing to claim that it had a substantial effect on the war. But at least if we take a look at Kinkaku and Ginkaku again, it seems like they were a pretty serious threat in the First War, despite the fact that they should have been operating independently. It is true that at one point the Kinkaku force worked as operatives of the Cloud Village, but by the time they killed Tobirama, it's extremely unlikely that this was still the case. I highly doubt Kinkaku and Ginkaku would be allowed to set foot in the Cloud Village again after attempting to assassinate the second Raikage. So it doesn't really add up that a force they were in charge of would be a part of the Cloud's military long after this had happened. And yet, despite all of this, as we know, the Kinkaku force was responsible for Tobirama's death. And we also know that this wasn't because Tobirama, or anyone from the Leaf for that matter, had tracked them down, but instead because they had tracked down the Leaf Ninja and surrounded them. And I mean, this is just one rogue faction. It's possible that there were plenty of others all over the place operating independent from the village they originated from, and depending on what each faction's motives were, they could have done plenty to slow down or even temporarily stop the ninja world's progress towards peace.
Correct.
Anyway, I think I've covered everything I wanted to by now, all the major stuff anyway, but if I missed anything,
great video, great video, Swag, as always.
Take care.
Peace out. And there you guys have it, folks. That was Swagkage's explanation of the First Great Ninja War. I thought it was very insightful. I think he put a lot of thought into the possibilities of what the catalyst was for this First Great Ninja War. So these are my thoughts on the First Great Ninja War. From my understanding, Hashirama was the one that gave, a couple of tailed beasts to each great nation. And the bottom line is this. In most cases, power breeds corruption, right? So these Kage, having these Bijou now, what was going through their mind was most likely that now that they have Bijou at their disposal, they are no longer greatly inferior to Hashirama, who I'm sure they greatly respected, just due to his power, the absolute power that he possesses, being basically the superior to Madara Uchiha, arguably, right? We know how fearful the shinobi world is and was of Madara Uchiha. So once they got the Bijou, they basically had more guts and were more daring in their intention. So when they had that 5 Kage summit set up by Hashirama, most likely, they weren't very budging. They weren't very cooperative with him. And Hashirama is someone, unlike Madara, that believes in free will, that believes in one's ability to choose what his or her choice is in any matter. So he wasn't tyrannical. He wasn't someone who ruled with an iron fist, despite his absolute power and his godly ability, right? And because of that, with all those variables to take into account, the product of all those variables was disaster, and hence the First Great Ninja War, right? Tensions were high. The lust for power was there from all Kage besides Hashirama himself. So we had this First Great Ninja War. And I'm sure within those respective nations, there were coups, there were political factions that disagreed with the higher-ups, right? Probably, the political faction of Kinkaku and Ginkaku. Their unit was probably a political faction that didn't want to see things go down this way. Maybe they thought that the people of their village don't deserve this kind of turmoil and despair and misery with a war that they believe isn't right, isn't righteous. So they went after the second Hokage and the second Raikage, and they killed Tobirama, right? What I'm very interested in is what were the events and factors that contributed to Hashirama's death. That's what I'm interested in, right? I believe, to my understanding, there is no definitive reason to explain Hashirama's death, right? Because he's just way stronger than everybody else. He is the blatant superior of the shinobi world at that period in time. The only guy that stood a chance was Madara, and he failed to defeat him. So I wonder how he died. I don't think it's very reasonable to assume he was ambushed, because I just think he's too powerful for that, to be quite honest with you. I wonder how he died. Maybe it was from natural causes. Maybe someone did kill him. Maybe I'm wrong in assuming that he can't be killed unless you're Madara Uchiha. Who knows? But I'm very interested to see how he died from that. But this first Great Ninja War, right, was probably one of the first great events in Naruto history that started this yin and yang cycle of crisis and peace, right? Throughout Naruto history, there's always crisis. There's always moments of peace, right? Until obviously Naruto came around and changed the world. And even now, there's still crisis, even in Boruto. We just happen to have cyborgs now. It's not really shinobi anymore, unfortunately. But the point is, the first Great Ninja War, as indicated by its name, was one of the first events in Naruto history that started this cycle of hate, as explained by Pain, as explained by Madara, with their respective philosophies intact. So, I think Naruto's history, is very well done by Kishimoto. I believe he ingrains these themes within these events in history, right? Like the Madara and Hashirama fight, the Great Ninja Wars. All these moments in history represent something more than just the surface level battles that we see visually. There's themes to be taken from them. And I think Kishimoto did a very good job in doing that, right? The duality of Madara Uchiha and Hashirama Senju and their very philosophies, right? Madara Uchiha was someone who believed his way was the only way, that free will wasn't meant to be given to individuals, that the free will had to be taken away for there to be optimal peace. While on the other hand, Hashirama was on the other extreme, right? So there is a dichotomy. Hashirama's was people should have their free will, and we should believe that there is good in every person, right? And that we should let them choose, and with the right approach, they will choose the right choice, right? So there's this duality, and within the Naruto fandom, it's discussed which philosophy is the just one, right? Because even now there's still conflict within the Naruto verse. There's still conflict even now. So some people ask themselves, was Madara right? Should there be no free will because of the inevitable, infinite cycle of crisis and peace, right? Madara was very aware of that. I mean, Hashirama was as well, but his approach was different. He wanted to end the cycle. So you gotta ask yourself the question: Is taking away free will ethical? Right? Is taking away free will ethical? Because some people believe humanity itself is free will. The ability to have the freedom to have your own rational thoughts and beliefs and to be able to make your own choices. So there's definitely a duality. There's definitely a discussion to be had. With Hashirama defeating Madara, his philosophy reigned triumphant in the Naruto verse. And this was the product. Not to say that he was wrong or right, I'm not saying that. But this was the product that we got from that. The Great Ninja Wars, the conflict, but the peace as well. Naruto being born. Naruto is a reincarnation of Hashirama, right? Ashura and Indra, right? So there was peace at the end of the war arc. That's a good thing. Madara's philosophy once again failed. And ironically, well, I don't know if that's ironic because I think Kishimoto obviously had his intention, Sasuke tried to continue Madara's philosophy unintentionally. And it's probably a biological thing. He's hardwired to be like Indra and Madara, right? So at the end of the war arc, he attempted to take away free will once again by killing Naruto. Well, attempting to kill Naruto and taking over the shinobi world as we know it. Maybe it wasn't through the infinite Tsukuyomi, but it was through his own methods, right? He failed to do so as well. Naruto reigned triumphant. From this, we can imply Kishimoto's philosophy, I would argue, is more close to Naruto's and Hashirama's, respectively. However, I think he's given enough credit to Madara and Sasuke for us to leave us thinking. I think that's his point, is to leave us thinking and really exploring in depth this duality, right? So I think that's what this first Great Ninja War really represents, right? The first battle of philosophies, right? And it also represents Hashirama's philosophy being imposed on the Naruto world, on the Naruto verse. And this is the product, right? It's up to you to decide, was he right or was he wrong? Was Madara right or was he wrong? I think Kishimoto wants us to decide that for ourselves. And of course, he happened to give us an amazing and illustrious history and storyline with this Naruto manga slash anime. It's very well done. But yeah, guys, that's my thoughts on this. It's very interesting stuff. You know, we can go well beyond the aesthetics, the battles, the punching, the blasts, and really get into the themes ingrained by Kishimoto himself. Again, this just speaks testaments to the kind of author, prolific author, Kishimoto really was. Well, yeah, guys, let me know in the comment section below what your thoughts were. This was a great video by Swag. I think he did a very good job explaining the intricacies of the First Great Ninja War. Well, that's going to wrap it up. If you guys have any recommendations, please let me know in the comments, and I'll catch you in the next video. It's Great signing out. Peace.